Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's panel discussion, The Future of Family Business. Let's get started. I would like to start with Dr. Daboob. And if you could you briefly tell us just about your family business? So what it is that your family business does and what you think of as your unique source of competitive advantage, the DNA behind the success of the business.
Thank you, Tony. We are in several businesses in Central America and here in the United States. Emplaza is a biodegradable packaging manufacturing company serving customers in the Central American region and here in the United States. We manufacture packaging materials that end up in products like Gerber, Fruit of the Loom, Gap, at Walmart, Target, etc. Our other company, Dice, is a distribution company mainly of food and snacks. We represent brands like Ferrero from Italy, Friegels from Brazil, Trolli from Germany, and several others from the United States. Until recently, we also represented Wrigley's chewing gum. Dioro, which we sold in 2014, was our first company. We used to manufacture cookies there. We were considered the Kibblers of Central America. We also have a real estate company, and there are investments that we do in renewable energy and in crowdfunding. My parents founded Dioro in 1968, and then my brother and I founded the other companies as strategic components of the main company. I ran Emplaza and Dice for several years until I joined the government of El Salvador in 1994. I was in government in several positions, including as Secretary of the Treasury for 12 years, without belonging to any political party then or now. And then I came to the United States, to Washington. I was the Managing Director of the World Bank Group. So I receive and pass on the baton of the daily operations to my brother. Today, my younger brother, runs all the companies in Central America, and I manage our interests outside the region, as a family office here in the United States. To answer the second part of your question in terms of what I think has been the DNA of our business success, I would say that, and this might be very common to many businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, hard work, discipline, not doing business with the government, delegate, but verify the implementation of the decisions made, and invest in the people that make this possible, both internally and externally. Something that is perhaps different from other businesses, and we learned this from my father, who passed away 2 years ago at the age of 90 and who had worked all of his life in our businesses, is that we do not borrow money. We don't go to the banks, or anybody else, we try to avoid doing it. We reinvest as much as possible. And finally, and I think this audience will understand it, and this is not, this is true, we believe that God is the chairman of our board. And I think this is actually the one thing that future generations in my family, if they keep it up that way, him as a member of the board of directors, chances are that the success that we have had thus far will continue. So that's a little bit of who we are and what I think has conduced or allowed for success since 1885, when we started some of our businesses.
Outstanding. Thank you very much, Dr. Daboob. So I'll pass the same question now on to Nick Carosi. Could you tell us a little bit about your family business and the DNA, the source of the success of your family business?
Sure. Though I wish I wasn't following Juan, second fiddle here. But so we are a relatively small, localized family business, about a century old. It was started by my great-grandfather and his counterpart, John Arvin, both Italian immigrants, kind of your classic American dream story. Both came here. My great-grandfather, his older brother, was doing the family business in Italy, which was a tiny, tiny stone quarry. And he told his mother, "No way I'm working for my brother." I'm going to America, so 13 years old. She puts them on a ship and says, your uncle's in New York, you're welcome to go find him. So, my son's 18 and I still watch him across the street. It's just hard to imagine today. But, so he came to America, spent a couple years in New York and Philly as a stonemason, and then kind of hooked up with John Arbin and got into this cast stone and precast business. The Arbins are no longer a part of the business anymore, and that after John Sr. died, John Jr. shortly thereafter kind of sold out his interest. So I'm the fourth Nick Carosi that's been here. My father's still actively working, and the junior and senior have both since passed away. So very rare to have a family business survive 4 generations, much less a century old. But what we do is we are mainly commercial, large, multifamily residential contractor. We clad the exterior of buildings. So we precast, we prefabricate these architectural concrete panels we have a manufacturing facility here in Woodbridge. We finish them, we put them on a trailer. You may drive by them and curse these big trucks on the highway as you see them come by and stop traffic. But and then they get erected and installed on the building. So a lot of office buildings and residential buildings that you'll see is, what we're doing is cladding everything but the windows. So the jam sections and details. So generally it's heavily commercial, albeit last couple of years the commercial market hasn't had much to say. So we've certainly done a lot more residential in the last 5 years, and particularly in the last 2 years since COVID. But as well as hospitals, and particularly in DC, a lot of government buildings as well. So we have about 150 to 170, depending on our ups and downs, employees here. A lot of very tenured employees. There's only 2 Carosis, but we have 4 or 5 other families that work here as well. So we like to think of ourselves as a family business in terms of we are run by a family, but we also have great families that their mothers and their fathers have worked for us, and now their sons are working for us too. So it really helps our environment. So we've grown from a very small producer to considered a large producer, and certainly done some of the more high-end buildings in the area. Our work generally stays DC Metro, which is basically Baltimore to Richmond. We have done jobs as far north as Boston, as far south as Charlotte, but generally we try to stay in the pocket that we're comfortable in and is easy to ship to. So the secret to our sauce, I would say, similar to Juan, is a couple of things. The story of a family business generally goes like this. The first generation builds it, the second generation maintains, and the third generation destroys it. We've been lucky to have 3 generations, and I hope my son will say a 4th one day, that didn't follow that mold, and try to be the hardest working people here, set the example for everybody else. So hard work, dedication goes a long way. We've been blessed with very, very good employees, very tenured employees, and again, a lot of families that put the same dedication into this business as we do. Similar to as Juan was saying, we also a lot of family business. One of the problems is generations tend to bleed that business dry for their own benefit. We good years and bad years, we try not to pull money out. We really don't have any loans. We either reinvest or hold that money for the bad years. As you can imagine, construction can vary up and down greatly year to year. So we'll go a couple of years to have very good years, and a couple of years that are not so good. So we maintain a lot of money and equity and cash in the business, so that we don't take out loans, and we're in control of everything we do. And the third thing, and really, I'm getting more into nuts and bolts than probably anybody cares about, but the artistry that we do, which really came from our founders. My grandfather, Nick the First, and John were both stone sculptors and masons. My grandfather worked on If anyone's crossed Memorial Bridge as you're crossing, going towards the Lincoln, as a 17-year-old, he was out there sculpting the marble and the stone and the eagles and the lion that are on the tail of the bridge, and did a lot of work. Worked on the rotunda of the Capitol, and in front of Union Station, there's a huge fountain where Atlas is holding the globe on his shoulders. So he took that trade work that he had as a kid and really brought that into our business. So we make our molds, which are basically, if you think of it like a bathtub where we pour concrete in. So we have these big molds that we have on the floor. We pour the concrete inside, and then we strip it out and bring that to that process again. So we make our molds from a process that really Grandpa brought to us, which is ornamental plaster, and we make these sections out of plaster and details, and then we make a concrete mold copy of that and use that as the base of our mold. Most guys today in our industry either use steel or wood, or sometimes fiberglass. And there's good and bad to everything, but the artistry that our work entails, we still do things the exact same way, much larger scale than we used to. The panels have gotten larger and larger. We take pride in that artistry. We take pride in the history of that company. So Grandpa died about, when I say Grandpa, I speak of Nick the First, but Grandpa died about 25 years ago. And he ran plaster the day he died. He was 98 years old and ran plaster that morning and went home and passed away in his chair. And for him, that was a pretty good day. The only day I saw him tear up was the day that I walked in covered in plaster, and seeing his great grandson doing the trade work that he loved brought a tear to his eye. So otherwise, I don't think he ever cried. So, so we take a lot of pride in the artistry that those generations brought, and our competitors and people from outside of our market see the way we manufacture, and they think we're crazy. They don't quite know how we make any money. We think it's so simple, and we also are deathly afraid that Grandpa will come down from heaven, and if we ever try to do something different. So I would say that's the very nuts and bolts secret to our sauce. So sorry if I went way too far deep in for all of y'all. So.
Oh, no, that was outstanding. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing. Now I'd like to go to Professor Griffin. The same question to you. So could you give us, paint a picture of your family business and what you think is the secret DNA of your business? What's the source of competitive advantage?
Yeah, of course. Hi, just so happy to be here and talking about something that means so much to me. So our family business is Griffin Living. We're a real estate developer, and I represent the 6th generation in my family to go into this business. My father right now is CEO, his father before him, etc. And Griffin Living has done everything and currently does everything from shopping centers to office buildings, apartments, homes, pretty much you name it. But the emphasis and what we mostly do tends to change with the need of the society. So in my mind, the secret sauce, or the most important thing that we do is that we start with the customer. So it sounds simple enough, but I think some companies start with a beautiful product, and we are proud of the things we build. We build truly beautiful, innovative, lovely living spaces. But that's not the thing that drives us. The thing that drives us is what kind of spaces our customers need. And there's a bit of a Catholic, there's very much a Catholic sense of vocation around this. So my grandfather would have been building hangars, airplane hangars for World War II. That's what was needed at the time. My dad built houses for men who came back to the war and wanted to have their families. at this point, we are building senior living communities as those families get older. One really amazing thing to me is because we've been in some of the same areas of California, we're actually building senior living for some of the people who lived in our homes. So some of those very same people. It is a pretty large operation. We have projects, across coasts, and at any given time, about 9 figures of revenue coming through the business in any given year. And but I think the most important thing is that we're constantly looking to customers and thinking, what is a way that we can make them flourish in their lives? And this is especially beautiful in senior living and the opportunity that we have right now. Our seniors feel so disregarded and unseen. Some of them feel so lonely and useless that when they get to the point that they need that kind of help, they just want to die. And our goal really as Griffin Living is to build a space for them to feel cherished and to want to flourish, and where their families can visit with them in that space. So, well, we'll start there. Thank you.
Tony, you're on mute.
Yep. Thank you, Carl. Thank you very much, Professor Griffin. All right, I want to go back to our panel now and focus. Now that we have an idea of what your businesses do, I want to focus on this successful, again, you each described how you've gone through very successful successions. Nick, you noted, and we have a lot of academic literature on this, that most family businesses don't make it past the 3rd generation. I will note, some people try to paint that as a problem of family business, but that's not the view of family business that we take here, and it's also just sort of a nonsense view. Most businesses don't make it past probably 20 to 25 years. So if you think you're making it to the 3rd generation, you're already making it past where most businesses that are non-family businesses would have failed, right? So family business, we know, has staying power, but all 3 of you come from businesses that have demonstrated what we might call exceptional staying power. And so if you could share what you think in this next question, what you've learned from your experience and what you think the key is for successfully transitioning to a new generation while maintaining that DNA, that source of success. And Dr. Daboob, I'll go back to you to lead us again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Please call me Juan Jose. I think a little bit of as a summary, and then I'll explain, but the appetite, the hunger that the 1st generation, which Nick described very well in the case of his grandfather, is a very important component. Resilience is also very important. Committed owner's mindset, and reminding everybody about that. An obsession with the front lines, and as Aurora mentioned, with the customer, with the client. I will add a couple of other things, which is to try to maximize a double bottom line. And we have in our family what I loosely call an 80-20 rule, which I will refer to in a minute. So in terms of lessons learned, I would like to provide some context. My family, my grandparents migrated from Bethlehem in Palestine, Christians that left at the time of the Ottoman Empire in 1885, came to El Salvador and started from zero. They didn't speak the language, they didn't have any money, they didn't know anybody. And yet, in a period of 30, 40 years, they became very successful. One of them from my mother's side, one of the largest cotton growers of the country, and the other one from my father's side in real estate. The first vehicle that was not owned by a military person or by the president of the country was owned by my grandfather. So they were very successful, but not the third generation, but the second generation, so that's the generation of the siblings of my parents, they basically ruined the whole thing. And so my father had to start all over again in 1968. So he couldn't go to college, he couldn't go to school. He started working way before he got married when he was 15 years old. And this goes to the resilient part, which is you have something in the DNA, you have that aspiration and that hunger to succeed and be ready for whatever destiny throws at you. So after a period of time, when he started his own business, a small bakery in 1968, we had a major war in El Salvador. El Salvador was attempted to be taken over by the communists, and thanks to San John Paul II and President Reagan and the Salvadorian people, we were able to kick them out of the country. But in the process, some 5% of our population was killed. Some 22% of our population migrated primarily to the United States. And so most businesses were destroyed during the war. So we had to start all over again. As a matter of fact, in that same period, my younger brother, the one that runs the businesses in El Salvador now, was kidnapped. So resilience and being able to rebuild, regroup, reinvent yourself and stay together is one of the lessons learned. As I also mentioned before, I have spent a part of my life in government and also in very large public and private organizations. I have worked in 110 countries from around the world, in the Middle East, in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America. And as you mentioned, Tony, I'm in the board of 2 publicly traded companies, a SPAC and a Fortune 500 company, and in a large bank and non-for-profit. And I'm not saying this to talk about myself. I'm saying this for the following reason. The common denominator in all of these very large organizations where I have had an opportunity to work on is the high and increasing cost of doing business, which jeopardize the future of these institutions. The main source being bureaucracy, inefficiencies, excessive regulation, and in many occasions, angry stakeholders, to name a few. So I mention this because in its own scale, family-owned businesses and their transitions must be prepared to these internal and external factors and to mitigate the obstacles so that, we can continue to be successful. So with that premise, the question really becomes, why is profitable growth hard to achieve and sustain from generation to generation? Part of the answer is that most executives manage their companies as if the solution is external, market related, strategy related, winning the customers. And, I'm very interested about this topic. And so in a little bit of reading that I did, Bain & Company found that 90% of the time, the root cause is actually internal. So the main challenge for big companies, but also for family-owned businesses, and that's part of what we have been through, is internal. Part of the problem is internal, and we need to be able to overcome that. And such internal challenges come from distance, from the front lines, from the loss of accountability that happens as you grow, and the excessive bureaucracy or processes that you build into your company. So you have to be mindful that with growth, with challenges, come these, with that growth, also these challenges that I just mentioned come. And really, these predictable challenges are ready to create a crisis if not handled in a timely fashion. So in my humble opinion, to enhance the chances of a successful transition, one has to be mindful of size. We heard from Nick the size of their company, and from Aurora, we have about 1,200 people in our cases, and there is a lot of temptation to grow, and of course, why not? But we have to be mindful of the bureaucracies that you generate, the the opportunities that you lose in identifying challenges as you advance and as you grow. And so you need to focus on resolving those challenges that you see in your competition or in other companies more than, and this is tricky, more than focusing on the individual capacity of the family member or members who are currently running or helping to run the companies. And I know it is difficult to separate, but if you put in the middle of the conversations in your family, and the earlier you do it, the better, the problems of the business, rather than the problems within the family, there is a chance to make the transition successful. So give a reason to be busy, give a reason to awaken to the hunger that characterized the founders. And it is also very important to develop the concept of the double or even triple bottom line, business, family, and community. So it is better, or we accept to have a relatively low ROI as long as we keep the family together and that we can make a positive contribution to the community where our companies are based. And finally, the 80-20 rule that I made a reference to, as of today, I've been here in the DC area now for 16 years, and I go often and I have board meetings and everything. But every day I call my mother and we talk 80% of our conversation, even if it's a 5-minute conversation, and I used to do that with my father till he passed away. 80% of our conversation is family related and 20% of our conversation is business related. When I meet for board meetings and I talk to my brother, or when I talk to my brother, which is very often as well, 20% of our conversation is family related and 80% of our conversation is business related. So I do not know for sure what my 4 children and my 5 nephews will do in the future, but teaching them by virtue of example about who's the chairman of the board, the 80-20 rule, and helping them identify in advance the challenges that are likely to face, I honestly trust that we will have set a strong basis upon which to build a successful future for the family and for the family business and for the community where we are in. So that's might have been a lot of information, but I wanted to start by highlighting the 4 or 5 areas that I think are common across the different transitions and experiences we have had, namely, again, hunger for success, resilience, committed to owner's mindset, obsession with the front lines, maximize a double bottom line, and the 80-20 rule. Thank you, Tony.
All right. Thank you very much, Juan Jose. Outstanding. I will now go back to Nick. So the same question is to you. Just lessons learned from your experience in successfully transitioning this DNA of the business onto future generations.
Again, I wish I wasn't following Juan Jose again, but what a great answer that was. So I can say this from my perspective of the element of stepping up, and then of my future thoughts as I look at that now to my kids, which is interesting. But so one of the things that certainly my father did very well in kind of my, I'll say, training is, particularly in our business, which is construction, dirty business. I went to very good schools and got very, very fine degrees, and right out of college, spent 3 years pouring concrete and sweeping the floors and really doing every job in our manufacturing facility, and learning it. And frankly, I'd spent every summer for 6 or 7 years before that, but doing the same. But so I certainly knew the business inside and out, and from the bottom up perspective. And while that was not pleasurable in terms of seeing my friends graduate college and working on Wall Street and doing this and that, and I'm brushing dirt off myself every day, it has been an unbelievable benefit for me today, as I know the business and understand each aspect of it. The other thing I think is so important in the transitioning is you know, it's a very, very difficult process to go through to understand what the child's, what your not necessarily child, or it could be nephew or anybody, but what their intentions are as they grow up. I mean, you know, my grandfather, the second generation, really wanted nothing to do with this business, and was, I'll say, forced into it from a strong Italian father. And you know, and luckily for him, his father really lived most of his life, died 2 years earlier than he did. So and Grandpa really was here every day, and so our succession almost skipped a generation. That's not quite fair to say, but my dad came in and really took on much more of a role. But my grandfather really did not have the heart of the business in him. It's not what he wanted to do. And you know, I think it's a difficult question for an adult to ask anybody, even a high school or a college. You know, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Do you want to, you know, particularly my kids watch me work 18 hours a day. I'm sure they're thinking, good Lord, that's not, you know, that's not what I want to do. But you know, so, and will their responses be truthful in terms of, or are they saying what they think you want them to hear? So it's a delicate question to ask and a delicate question to perceive. And but I certainly think it's very important that it's a willing transfer and a willing transition, and not a forced transition. Because as Juan Jose said, if you know, when that desire of, you know, the success of all family businesses is the desire of that founder, and that carrying through to the generation that certainly can get lost if it's not a willing transfer. So while I don't have an exact solution of how to determine that, because I do think it's an awkward conversation. I remember I was a sophomore in high school, and I think there was an outside company that was offering to buy our, you know, last 20 years has been a major consolidation effect of all construction, but manufacturing like us, where large conglomerates will grab up different plants to control the market. You know, somebody had offered to buy our company, and, you know, my dad set me down at 14 and asked me, you know, awkwardly, what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I thought I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but it's still quite the thing to put on him. And he wasn't, you know, throwing his fist down, but it was a serious conversation. And you know, I do think it's awkward, and luckily it was what I wanted to do, and it's worked out thus far. But you know, those are conversations that I'll have either with my 3 sons or daughter one day, or maybe all of them, and we'll see where it goes. So.
Thank you very much, Nick. I appreciate your honest reflections on what happened in your own experience. And now I'd like to go back to Aurora. So are there some lessons that you've learned, or perhaps you're even learning right now, on what you think is sort of key to a successful transition?
Absolutely. So first of all, it's just such a privilege to hear these other answers, and to hear about family business from these other perspectives, and imagine what my dad or grandfather might say if asked this question, and how that's different from how I'd respond. I want to double click really quick on this idea of the double and triple bottom line. I thought that was just perfectly said, Dr. Daboob. And it's, there's a reason why, despite our size as a real estate firm, we've never gone public. And that's so that we can, we don't have to have some sort of fiduciary duty apart from, you know, making good return for our investors. We can really make decisions that are good for our family and our customers and the communities that we build in. So we feel that very strongly. In terms of what I think makes a successful transition of business. So I should preface this by saying I grew up with no interest in my family business, and with perhaps even a bit of an aversion to it. I saw that it was really stressful. I didn't think that making money could be deep or very important. And so I went to school and I studied classics. I studied Greek and Latin, and my parents were fine with it. I was sort of shocked. Everyone asked them, what is she going to do with that? And like, anything she wants, it'll be fine. So I ended up getting a job offer from McKinsey at the end of school. So you can go work for McKinsey if you've studied Latin. But I ended up getting a Rhodes Scholarship and going to England to study more Latin and medieval theology. So once again, I was like going pretty far away from this real estate developer future. And again, my parents were like, nah, it's okay. Like, the business will always be here. Isn't it great that she gets to go read all these wonderful books, and let's see. So I come back from that and finally decide, all right, to be honest, I got a little tired of having these really long philosophical conversations with people at Oxford. They're fascinating, but they just get to a point like, okay, what are you going to do about it? You might know what's so true, but when are you actually going to act on it? So at that point, I realized I had something of a practical streak and should channel it toward business. So I went and got my MBA. I was still hesitant to go anywhere near my family business. And it was where my dad really provided an open opportunity for that was in two ways. One, he started asking me about senior care through the lens of some of the ethical and theological studies I had done while I was at Oxford. So I was thinking about Aquinas and the dignity of the human person, and from that was doing some work in bioethics. My dad started asking me about that from the perspective of doing senior care, and how can we combat this attitude that seniors are disposable, the growing sort of euthanasia movement. And we started engaging about that, and what would it look like to build living facilities that countered this culture of death. So that was one way he opened the door for me. Another way he opened a door for me was by my sort of specialty by training. So to the extent that I had jobs other than going to school, it was all in communications, in university communications, in communications in the government. So he started asking me to just look over some things for him for his communications department. And after a while, I was like, they're doing a terrible job. You should have, like, I should replace your consultants. So I replaced all of his consultants. And then I was like, okay, well, you should probably just bring this and make it an internal department. So now we have a communications and marketing department. So I guess to back this up, how I found a way into the business was one, that my dad allowed me to, allowed it to be very arm's length, very much my decision. In his mind, it's not his business or like the family business that has to get perpetuated. The family business exists for the family. And if the family doesn't want it, then it doesn't need to be there. So he had the humility to do that. And I really appreciated that, because now I know as I am engaging with it, that I've chosen it and I want it. The second was bringing me up, not as you might expect somebody being groomed to take over the whole thing, that they would have a certain path, that they'd be on the projects every weekend, that they'd be, a finance major or whatever in college. None of those expectations were put on me. In fact, I was brought up as an expert in what I had expertise and interest in. And now that I'm in the company, I'm learning everything else. I just happen to rise up through communications and marketing, and I'll learn the forward planning, the finance, and everything else. And then if I had a bit of advice, I think my dad is already doing this really well, but something that is helping to facilitate this transition is that he's open to the experiences and perspective that I bring. So, I have plenty of filial piety and respect and awe for what they've put together. I also know that in order for them to succeed from here on out, they're going to have to be able to attract younger talent. They can't necessarily do that with a super top heavy organization. They need me to help figure out how to talk to younger people. administrators are becoming more expensive. They're becoming less part of something that you expect a really lean team to have. So I'm teaching the executive team to use their own productivity software and do some of their own administrative work that they never would have had to 20 years ago. My dad's been open to all of this input, and so we get a lot of the best of both worlds of experience and innovation.
Great. Thank you very much, Aurora. So at this point, this would be where I'd say, let's give everyone a round of applause, but we're all on Zoom. So if you want to go to the little reactions, you can just give everyone a little round of applause like this. And that is it's a lot quieter than you'd normally find in an auditorium. But we have now about a little over 15 minutes. We're right on schedule for question and answer from the audience. I think, again, given the sheer number of people that we have in a Zoom room, I'm going to try to avoid having everyone talk at once or have to administer or sort of MC questions. So if I already have a couple of questions in the chat. If you have questions for our panelists, if you could private message them to me, I will then moderate and ask the questions. While you are typing up your questions, I will start off with the first one that's already in the queue. This is for Juan Jose. And the question is, what is the outlook for family businesses in El Salvador, given the current government's move to Bitcoin? And if it's all right, I'll generalize it, since El Salvador's move to Bitcoin might not be generalizable to all of the family businesses in the room. That is an interesting question, so I do want you to answer it. But could you also say something along the lines of how in your experience, do family businesses adjust to change, especially technological change, right? Like we're seeing right here. So.
Thank you. Well, on the last part, like any other business, you have to learn and adapt. And each business is different. In our case, because we work with many suppliers from around the world, there are things that we choose to do in logistics, in the kind of technology that we're using, and the other ones that we have to adopt in order to work with our suppliers.
The same question to Nick and Aurora: how will El Salvador's move to Bitcoin impact? No, I'm just kidding. If we could, though, have you, if either of you want to comment quickly on how your family businesses have adapted to change or technological change.
I would say that's a challenge for a family business like ours. Again, we're small potatoes in comparison, but in terms of technology is sometimes driven by some of the larger firms, and we take a lot of pride that we do things the exact same way Grandpa does, but we don't want that fear of Grandpa to stop us from seeking better and better ways and more efficient ways. So I would say that's for us that can sometimes be a struggle as the environment changes to change with it. So you got the old founders saying, well, we did it this way. That's the way we want to do it, because I said so.
Aurora, do you want to add anything?
I think in terms of the product, we're very good at embracing innovation. So before COVID even broke out, we were putting in several $1 million air filtration systems into our senior living centers. And it just so happens that they filter the air to an N95 mask level. And so that just turned out great. We were able to do that because of this double, / triple bottom line thing that we knew it was going to smell better, breathe easier, be nicer, be safer. And then it turned out just to be a great move. We are constantly adding things to our buildings that people don't think to, that are above and beyond. I think where it is tough to have change is in like personnel and culture, and that'll come with time. I have no idea what the answer is there. I think we're going to grow into it.
All right, thanks. I think that will maybe play into our next question. This question actually comes from a similar question from several of our guests, and so I'll try to lump them together into a single question. Has faith always played a central role in your family business, or does faith? What role does faith play in your family business, and what would you say is the impact of that? And one step further, another question is, how do you engage your employees in that? So again, we'll go from Dr. Daboob and Nick and Aurora. Though if you'd rather pass, then let me know.
Well, just rather quickly, I think I said it before. For us, it's very important. Is central, not by definition, but by culture. Just to take on Aurora's word, you know, I saw my parents, our kids see ourselves really putting, you know, you every time we build a new building or we expand in an existing building, our manufacturing companies, we bring a priest to bless the facilities. We put a rosary in the middle of the cement. We put a prayer stamp somewhere. And when you go to any of our buildings, you will see a statue of Virgin Mary or a crucifix. And it's not, I mean, El Salvador it used to be a very Catholic country, but due to the theology of liberation, we lost a lot of them. But it is still a very conservative country. And we show what we believe in, but also we respect, in the case of our workers, if they have another denomination. So we don't force anything, but we respect them on that front. And I think this is something that has worked very well for us. All of my kids, 3 of them went to Notre Dame, and that helps in framing a little bit the conversation. The youngest one wants to go also there. And so I think there is a conducive, there is a intertwined value there, which has worked for us very well.
All right, thank you. Nick?
So we have not started putting the rosaries in our panels, but I like that idea. So I mean, our employees are certainly a diverse population. So I would say we probably don't wear our faith as much on our sleeves as a company, but we certainly, it'd be hard for anyone. We as a company, we've long supported all of our Catholic charities. We've done a lot of work for Catholic charities of Arlington, and donated a lot of work across a bunch of Catholic charities and dioceses and churches throughout the area. So we certainly show our intentions, but I would hope that we as a family have shown our employees by example how our faith runs our life. You know, whenever there is a family that's experienced trouble or of need, I will say that we have an amazing group of employees that donate money for them, and we will match all donations and to a certain, and or even go higher. So it's a very tight-knit family that we try to show by example how our faith runs us and supports us, but maybe we'll start putting rosaries in the panels and see if that helps. So, Aurora.
All right, thank you. Aurora.
So faith was not always a part of our family business. My grandfather's father was known as a bit of a bad boy, and my grandmother got a hold of my grandfather and really shook him up. And I think he was pretty turned off by his father being a bit of a bad boy, so he wanted to go back on the straight and narrow, but he was vaguely Protestant, and my grandmother just pulled him right on board the bark of Peter, and they and their 8 children were very Catholic. Since then, I would say it's very much a Catholic business, insofar as we see ourselves doing something very Catholic in serving people with the product we make. We try to exhibit Christian charity to the people who work for us, our employees. What does it mean to give them responsibility and meaningful work and a good day at work? Are they making enough to really supply for their families in a dignified way? We think about using the proceeds from the business to help charities. We hire people who would otherwise be difficult to hire. A couple people that work as our consultants or ex-convicts. So really at every level, we are trying to figure out a way to live out our faith. It is rarely explicitly stated in what we do, but between all of us, we know that that's what we're getting after.
Great. Thank you very much, Aurora. We have time for one last question, and then we'll move to our second session. And again, I'm going to consolidate several questions in order to keep us on track. So our final question will be, what are some major challenges that you see in transition? And to lump some of these others together, they can be operational challenges. A specific challenge question we had was, how do you change the pay of first generation owners as you transition to new generations? So it's a very specific type of challenge. And so if you could each say just a minute or two on that topic, and then we'll conclude. Juan Jose.
Well, on the business side, like perhaps some others, we have gone through, the traditional process of developing, a family protocol to have some advisors who have more experience than we do. In 2014, when we sold a large portion of our business, my father, while still was alive, of course, made some decisions, as a family from the business perspective. And I think we have a relatively well, at least in paper for now, plan. But again, a lot, depends on, how you inherit the business and who runs it. And I think Aurora also said it, if after the second generation or the third, we are not as lucky as Nick's family, well, that's c'est la vie, that's part of the process, like everything else, like life itself. You're born, you grow up, and then you die. Hopefully, as many companies are lucky to go the 4 generations like Nick, but also, as you mentioned, Tony, I think so far, in general, family businesses are doing as well or better than traditional businesses. So in terms of just the part of one of the questions you made, we give opportunity to our children. Like my oldest son, he worked for Goldman Sachs. He's with BCG now. He's going for an MBA now at MIT. He will be very well positioned to start in some of our businesses. We don't force it. We invite them, but they have to have earned it. They need to have work outside first. And in our case, we also prefer if they have an MBA or a graduate level course. We don't tell them what to study, but hopefully, like my third daughter, she's studying industrial design at Notre Dame, and she might or might not join the company. So again, we encourage them. We put competitive salaries, depending on where our companies are located, and they might choose to go to our competition. Hopefully they won't. Hopefully they will come to the business, but we don't force that on them. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's a little bit of where we are in our case.
I think that's outstanding. Thank you. Nick?
So I think one of the challenges is simply how to successfully execute the transfer. Of course, everything you want to do is to not send Uncle Sam all that you have to, or only what you need to have to. And I would highly suggest that anyone with family business think about that early on, is your succession and how you're going to effectively transfer the equity, and get a estate planner to talk you through how best to do that, whether that be in terms of setting up generation skipping trust or, but there's a lot of innovative ways to do it. But I think those processes are a challenge, and particularly if it's not thought out very early on. If you think about it, the year you're trying to transfer, it's way too late. So, and as I said earlier, I think the other biggest challenge is making sure that next generation is willing and eager to take on that challenge. So, and they're not doing it out of obligation to the family. So I'll see how that goes in 10 years. So when I'm on this panel in 10 years, we'll see how effectively that happens or not. So, thanks.
That is a commitment that we will hold you to. So we will see you in 10 years. Hopefully we'll see you before then, but we will definitely see you in 10 years. And then Aurora.
I think the vast majority of work I've done in business is emotional work. I think a lot of people have the intellectual and practical know how to get things done. So I want to focus on the emotional aspect of a transition. And I think that, so I've been doing a lot of reading by this guy, Jocko Willink, lately. He wrote Extreme Ownership. He's this Navy SEAL. And of course, I have a siren barreling down the street. Okay. Navy SEAL, he wrote this thing called Extreme Ownership. And the point that he makes is really, you can end up in problems and transitions where nobody really wants to accept credit for where something gets dropped in a transition, or take responsibility for that. So to the extent that I can offer insight on that, I think if everybody is meeting in the middle where so say I with my dad, I'm taking ownership when my team doesn't perform, and I'm giving him credit for what he set up when it succeeds. And to the extent that he's trying to do the same thing for me, nothing gets dropped, nobody feels attacked, we're really on the same team. So take credit, give credit, take ownership, and be humble.
Great. Thank you very much, Aurora. I'll add on the last point that I'll try to post it to the Family Business Consortium website. During our conference in New York City in October, I had the opportunity to interview Tim Busch, who's the naming patron of our business school. And he shared the story of how the family ended up having to, I don't want to say they had to fire his father, but they had to ask his father to step away from the business because he was invested in the business to the extent that it might have even been harmful to his health. And so they encouraged him that he should take a few steps maybe away from the business as they were transferring the generation. So I'll try to provide that for all of you as well. Thank you very much, Juan Jose, Nick, and Aurora. I hope that you all enjoyed our conversation. We ran a little bit over, so I want to jump right into session 2. It is a pleasure to invite to the stage John Ream, who is Managing Director of Morgan Stanley's Private Wealth Management Division here in Washington, D.C. He earned his CPA designation with Price Waterhouse in Philadelphia, and he has an MBA in finance from the Wharton School. He manages over $1 billion in client assets and is regularly among one of the top financial advisors in the United States. Thank you very much for joining us, John. And you should have the ability to share your screen.
Well, first I'll say thank you for the invitation to join all of you today. Before I bring up the screen, I just want to say I'm sorry we're not together. If we were, we'd have been meeting in the Della Rada auditorium. I'm sorry we're not there. I've worked with the Della Rada family for years. They are a model of the things we've been talking about today. A model of how deliberate, good communication and planning can achieve successful business continuity across generations. And so I want to say hello to Joe and Elizabeth and Jennifer and Rafael Della Rada and thank them for their continuing generosity to Catholic University. So let me bring up a screen and I'll tell you what we're going to talk about today.
There's a green share screen button at the bottom. That should help you share. There you go.
How's that?
Perfect.
There we go. Let's see if I can do it. Tony, I'm not, there we go. So here's a table of contents of what we're going to talk about today. And everybody, relax. We're just going to look at some charts on a number of pages, and I'm going to throw out some commentary and just provide some of our views about how we think about the economic outlook. I'm a portfolio manager. We pick stocks, and having a sense of whether the economy is okay or not okay is a fundamental part of what we do. But investing in a business or in the stock market begins with beliefs about how the economy and the stock market works. And listening to the news every day, it's difficult not to develop a perception of instability and complete chaos. And this week's a good example of it with these 1,000-point swings we've seen in the market. But if we step back, and we need to step back and look at longer term trends and think in terms of years rather than weeks, we can develop a very different perspective. And as a preview of the charts that we're going to go through today, we think that this longer term perspective provides an appreciation of the prosperity and the stability in the US economy. So what you're looking at on this page, 3 different charts. The top chart is US GDP. That's the green line from 1990 to 2021. It's about $23 trillion today. The yellow line is personal income, and the blue line is consumer spending. Now, if you didn't know that was a chart of the GDP, if you thought that's just some stock, you'd say, wow, that's a heck of a stock. I'd like to own that stock. But the first thing that I think you take away from looking at longer term trends in the economy is the stability. You see a bump in 2008. You see a bigger bump in 2020, but that's all they are. They're bumps. The second chart in the middle of the page shows US population. We've grown from 250 million to about 330 million over that period of time. And a big part of the increase in GDP has to do with the increase in US population, something different in other parts of the world like Japan. The bottom chart is US GDP per capita, which has grown from about $30,000 per person to about $64,000 per person. It's a measure of economic prosperity. It's not a very good measure of the standard of living, which is harder for us to measure. Still, this is an indicator of how the average person in the United States is doing. In developing an outlook for the economy, we want to look at where the growth is coming from. It comes from real GDP growth and inflation. What you're looking at on the top is something called the personal consumption expenditure deflator provided by the government. You can see the stability for many, many years and the big jump in 2020. The bottom part of the chart is real GDP. Now, there are a couple of remarkable things about this chart. Nominal growth is the combination of these two numbers, real GDP growth and inflation. Combine real GDP with inflation and we get nominal GDP. What's remarkable is that in the 10 years from 1990 to 2000, nominal GDP growth averaged 4%. From 2000 to 2010, nominal growth was 4%. From 2010 to 2020, nominal growth was, wait for it, 4%. So why 4? Why not 8? Why not 3? Why 4? A big part of it is the growth in population and the steady growth in real GDP from productivity improvements, but also inflation. But the point of this chart is to make is that somehow, some way, over decades, the US economy continues to grow at a very steady and predictable rate. Inflation is the big news today, though. And we think it's important to draw the distinction between measured inflation of the prices of goods and services, that's CPI, versus other measures of inflation that drive financial asset prices. So what you're seeing in the yellow line is CPI inflation. And you can see it just jumps off the page, 7%. The lines at the bottom of the page are things like inflation swaps. There are Fed measures of break-even inflation. There are TIPS bonds that give us implied inflation, and those haven't budged. And isn't that odd? Isn't that odd that these measures of inflation haven't moved? And so we have to draw a distinction between the measured inflation of the prices of goods and services and the supply and demand for bonds and other yield-oriented investments. And what we're seeing on this page is that somehow, some way, the supply and demand for bonds has maintained a level of expectation in bond prices. It hasn't moved. The role of government in the economy has grown in recent years and is an important part of developing an outlook. Government spending is about 12% of GDP. What you're seeing on the top chart is government expenditure, total government expenditure in green. The yellow line is government tax receipts, cash coming in the door. So like any business, cash coming in the door, cash going out the door. The blue line is transfer payments associated with government social programs. And what you can see in this chart is that before 2008, happily, government tax receipts were generally more than current expenditures. Since 2008, we've run deficits every year since. But you can see the pretty steady relationship between expenditures, income, and expenses, and the big jump that occurred associated with the pandemic in 2020. It's extraordinary. The bottom chart shows annual government budgets and deficits. And you can see the very large deficit that occurred in 2008 and the larger deficit that's occurred since the pandemic began. Where did that deficit spending come from? It came from additional debt. Federal debt as a percentage of GDP has grown from about 60% of GDP in 2008 to 120% today. Much of that increase is associated with borrowing associated with the pandemic. And so the question is this level of debt unsustainable? Current expenditures in the government are about 80% from government social programs, 15% for defense, and only 5% is made up of interest payments on the debt. So our view is that growing debt could be a longer-term problem, mostly associated with crowding out other kinds of expenditures and other kinds of social priorities, but is not an immediate threat to the solvency of the US government. The bottom chart shows federal tax receipts as a percentage of GDP. That number has fluctuated between 16% and 18% of GDP since World War II. It's a remarkably stable number. It reflects the push and pull of politics, but the burden of taxation on GDP has not changed. And as we develop our economic outlook, I can say in other countries, it's a different view, where government taxation has become a much larger burden on GDP. In the United States, the formula that we've had for the last 50 years has not meaningfully changed. Households is also a very important part of our growth and our spending forecast. The Federal Reserve publishes a report every year called the Flow of Funds that totals up the wealth of the United States. And it includes the ownership of real estate and the ownership of businesses. Ultimately, Microsoft is owned by individuals. The blue line shows the growth in US household net worth, which as of the end of 2021 was $140 trillion. And to put that number in perspective, US GDP is about $23 trillion. So the net worth of United States households relative to annual activity is an indicator of the sustainability of the US economy. The stock market is about 41% of household net worth. The remainder is largely commercial and residential real estate. The bottom chart, which I'm showing here, is household net worth as a percent of disposable personal income, wealth versus income. And this ratio has been improving since 2008, reflects a combination of rising asset prices and lower borrowing, which has provided us better measures of household financial stability. Bear with me. Remarkably, in the last 10 years, despite low interest rates, measures of household debt have actually improved. What you're looking at here at the top is household debt, which is mostly mortgage and consumer debt as a percentage of GDP. Largely because of subprime residential real estate, that number rose a lot in the 2000s up until 2008 and has declined since then. The bottom chart shows the measure of household debt to disposable income. And again, that shows a much healthier number than existed in 2008. These measures help us to assess whether mortgage and consumer debt in the banking system will be repaid. And recent measures provide signs of manageable levels of household debt. The low cost of debt provides continuing incentives to invest and to spend. There are many ways of looking at the cost of borrowing. Perhaps for all of us, the most relevant is what it costs to buy a house. Mortgage rates got under 3% last year. They're above 3% today, but not much. And over the course of the last 30 years, represent very, very attractive rates. The top chart shows borrowing associated with what's called middle market lending, leveraged loans, which is under 4% today. The prime rate is less of a relevant number, but we think that the cost of borrowing for many middle market businesses remains below 4%, providing continuing incentives to invest. An important part of our economic outlook involves the digitalization of the economy and the growing importance of intellectual property-based assets like software versus physical assets like traditional manufacturing. This is an important shift. This page is taken from a report by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which shows the different sectors of the economy and what percentage of the economy they represent, real estate being the largest, then government, then manufacturing. And now we have this category called digital economy. The question is, what's that? The digital economy is mostly three things. Digital enabling infrastructure, like data centers and cloud computing, e-commerce transactions, and digital media, which are things like subscriptions to Netflix and Spotify. Wages and salaries in the digital economy are significantly higher than the overall economy and represent an important consideration. As more and more individuals work in the digital economy, part of the growth in the economy and spending has to do with this shift into different industries emphasizing intellectual property-based businesses.
Hey, John, can I interrupt real quick? There's a little bit of feedback in your microphone. Could you turn the volume down a little bit?
How's that?
A little bit better. Thank you. That's better.
Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that. The last economic chart is a chart that shows the profitability of sales in the US economy. The idea is that this shift from physical-based assets to intellectual property-based assets is leading to higher levels of profitability. It's tricky to measure, but the idea is that the capital intensity of intellectual property-based assets is lower than physical asset-based businesses. And so for $1 of investment and $1 of sales, the level of profitability has increased significantly since 2000. So the digital economy, we think, is a very important contributor to the outlook for growth in the US economy. How's the sound volume? Tony, am I okay?
It's perfect now. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to shift. I've got just a couple slides to talk about the stock market, just to keep it in perspective. So this is a chart going back to 1990. The green and blue charts are the S&P 500 and the Russell 1000 Growth Index. The yellow is the Russell 1000 Value Index. The purple line is bonds, the Barclays Aggregate Index. And you can see that over the 30-year period, the returns on the stock market were 10.6%. Now, in the 10-year period from 2010 to 2021, returns were 15%. In the Russell 1000 Growth Index, annual returns in the last 10 years of 18%. And bonds have been returning 3.5%. If you look at the bottom chart there, you can see that bonds were keeping up with stocks. They were holding their own since 2011. But after 2011, we see a remarkable divergence between the performance of stocks and bonds. The incredible performance of the stock market inevitably leads to asking the question, is it real? Is this air or is this real? The top chart shows the relationship between the stock market and earnings. Earnings are the North Star of stock market performance. You can see the relationship was very tight until about 2014. And since 2014, the stock market is growing faster than earnings. The question is whether or not stocks have become decoupled. Does this represent overvaluation of stocks, or is the market discounting faster growth and higher levels of profitability in the stock market? That's the tough call to answer. The bottom chart shows forward earnings forecasts for the S&P 500. You can see the dip in the pandemic of March of 2020. We've recovered that dip and we've gone on from there, suggesting that the economic impact of the pandemic is behind us. Is the economic impact of the pandemic behind us? In answering that question, earnings estimates for the S&P 500 in 2022 call for 9% earnings growth in 22 versus 21. The consensus view right now is that we are going to continue to grow at a faster rate than we have prior to 2019. To put that growth in perspective, this chart shows the bands of growth. And so the top chart is earnings on the S&P 500 between 1990 and 2021. And the idea is a band between 4% growth and what 8% growth would be. The green line shows what actual growth was in between that band, about 6%. The lower chart shows a band of sales growth between 3% and 5%. And you can see the growth within that band. So over the last 30 years, that's how sales have grown. That's how earnings have grown. The success of the stock market reflects the investment cycle of assets into sales, into profits. When companies invest, sales and earnings must keep up to justify the investment.
Hi, John. Real quick, could you reset your volume again? It's echoing again.
How's that?
It's still doing it.
Tony, I'm in the Morgan Stanley environment. I'm not sure if I can help you echo.
That's okay. Well, do me a favor. Turn the mute, hit the microphone button at the bottom real quick, just to turn it off. There you go. And now turn it back on. See if just flipping it off and on fixes it.
How's that?
It's better. It's still a little echoey, but I think it'll be fine through the end of the call.
More slides. What you're looking at on this chart is the growth in S&P 500 and the line is 30. That's the green line. Percentage growth. The blue line at the bottom is the growth in sales. The yellow line is the growth in earnings. Now you should like about this chart is it shows that investment has been successfully monetized. Earnings growth has kept up with asset growth. This is a key consideration for understanding both in the stock market and the success of the ability of the companies to monetize investment. I'll try to start doing on sound. Tony?
Yes.
Doing on sound.
Say again. I'd say it is kind of hard to hear you. Can I have a idea that came from one of our attendees. Could I send you a phone number real quick? And if you call in, then we'll be able to do your audio via the phone.
Perfect. Okay.
All right. Here is phone number. I'm sending it. There's a chat. You should see it appear on your screen. It's going to ask you for the meeting ID, which is what I'm sending you next.
I've got the meeting ID.
Sorry about this, John. And that's the passcode. All right, do you see that number?
Wait, I don't.
So if you dial the 301 number, then enter that meeting ID when it prompts you, and then I'll ask you for a passcode. That's the 360 number.
The meeting ID on the passcode. If you give me the phone number, I'll dial it.
Okay, it's 301 715 8592.
Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. Enter your participant ID.
The pass is 360524. Hello, John?
Tony, can you hear me?
I can. Outstanding. Would you mind maybe going back to the previous slide and picking up there?
Yes.
Thank you.
This slide is something that helps us to understand how the stock market is successfully monetizing investment over time. The idea is that companies invest, but they have to bring it home. If a company like Exxon is spending money to drill wells, they've got to produce sales and cash at a rate that justify that investment. A drug company that develops new drugs, putting a lot of money into development, has to bring it home. And so for individual companies and for the stock market as a whole, we want to understand whether that whole investment cycle is working. So
John,
here,
one more suggestion: turn down the volume now on your computer because it's feeding back through your phone.
what's that?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay.
This is why I
So-
wanted us all to meet in person.
Right. But look at this chart for a second and imagine a company like Johnson & Johnson, or a company like Intel, or Microsoft, Amazon, investing a lot of money, reinvesting into capital expenditures, R&D, acquiring businesses. Well, they have to work. They have to create a rate of sales growth and earnings growth that provides return on investment that justifies the investment. What this chart is showing that in the aggregate for the stock market, it's working. Companies are successfully monetizing their investment successfully. I will say that we are doing this analysis today for all of the FANG stocks, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, who are investing enormous amounts of money into their businesses. They have very good sales growth rates, very good profitability, but the open question for each of them is, will they bring it home? If Facebook is investing in the metaverse, that's great. Will they bring it home? This page enables us to have a quick and dirty way of understanding where returns come from in the stock market. So the idea is that the return for the stock market in any given year, like 2013 or 2021, is a combination of three things: earnings growth, change in the valuation multiple, and dividend yields. It doesn't add perfectly, but it's pretty darn close. So you can look at each of the years in the last 10 years, and you can see we're using EBITDA per share as a measure of earnings growth, change in the valuation multiple, and the dividend yield. We add that up, and that equals calculated shareholder return. The next column shows the actual return. They're usually pretty close. In 2021, it was pretty close. But a helpful part of this analysis is to see, is performance in any year coming from real earnings growth, or is it primarily coming from a change in the valuation multiple? And you can see that in the years 2019 and 2020, the most important contribution to return was an increase in the valuation multiple. On the left side, in the left box, you can see forward EV to EBITDA, moving from 10 in 2018 up to 13, up to 16, up to 15. That expansion in the valuation multiple was an important part of returns in those years. A question for investors is, are those valuation multiples sustainable, or will they go back down the hill? So there's a level of growth and profitability needed to sustain those valuation multiples. So if growth this year continues to be strong, profitability is strong, interest rates don't move a lot, arguably the valuation multiple can be maintained. If not, it will go down. Last slide, folks. So part of understanding value in the stock market is the relative valuation of stocks and bonds. They should be comparable. we compare the valuation of stocks and bonds by calculating the free cash flow yield of the S&P 500. That's the yellow line. The yield on bonds is 10-year treasuries. That's the blue line. You can see that after 2008, the stock market got cheap relative to bonds, but that spread, that relative value spread between stocks and bonds has been narrowing ever since. The bottom chart compares the dividend yield on the S&P 500 with the yield on 10-year treasuries. The idea being that the yield on the stock market should provide a floor for the valuation of the stock market. At some point, if the yield on stocks got a lot higher than bonds and you had $1 to invest, you'd prefer to put it in the stock market rather than the bond market just for yield alone. Now, we're at a point today with interest rates so low that to a certain extent, we think that the dividend yield of the S&P 500 can provide a hard floor for the valuation of the S&P 500. Tony, that's it. That's the slides. I'm sorry for all the sound problems, but that's it.
No, so there, I think what was happening is there was so much information packed into those slides that it was creating feedback with the computer. It was an outstanding presentation. Thank you so much. And my apologies for that we had to be on Zoom and thus created the opportunity for said issues. One of the comments I received privately in here was, we were talking about the digital economy and suddenly the technology decided to strike back at us. But thank you very much, John. We have just under 10 minutes for questions. We'll manage questions the same way we did before, since there's so many of us. If you have questions, please send them to me via the chat, and I will moderate and ask them to John. That way, as we typically do, we often have a few people with the same question. I'll try to consolidate them. And so I got many coming in here. I'll start with, John, how would you suggest family business consider or react to this economic outlook?
I think the most important thing is to not put too much weight on recent events and recent trends, and instead pay more attention to longer term trends. The stability in GDP, profitability are very, very good. Now, I think that is something important to think about. To think, does the U.S. economy provide the safety, the foundation for success going forward? I mean, I believe that it does. Now, if you didn't think that government debt or household debt were sustainable, that they were a threat to the banking system, that the solvency of the U.S. government was unlikely, then your willingness to make big commitments into a business would be a lot harder. But that's not what these charts suggest. They say that the burden of taxation on the economy from the government is manageable, that the levels of household debt are manageable, that household net worth has grown, suggesting a backdrop of prosperity and stability. Now, there's winners and losers every day. I mean, there's good things and bad things happening in the stock market every day. But in the big picture, the outlook for the U.S. economy is sound.
Great, thank you. Another question that we had, I think this is similar to what the response you just gave us, or if there's three big takeaways from these charts. One of them is clearly the soundness of the U.S. economy. If you had two other sort of things that we should be keeping as managers in the back of our heads for the next 12 months, what it would be? 11 months, I guess, left in the year.
I think two things. We would all like to know what predicts growth in the future, and what is a reliable way to think about what growth can be. And I think that the important thing is that page I showed, the pace of monetization. When companies invest, they have a management team that gets paid annual bonuses, long-term compensation in order to successfully manage those assets. So when the management team at Microsoft is trying to figure out how to allocate capital and do what they're going to do, they are given benchmarks, hard benchmarks on return on invested capital, earnings per share growth, other metrics they have to hit if they want to get paid. And so I think the second takeaway of these charts is to understand this pace of monetization, and that every business, a public business, a private business that invests, has to have a clear way of answering the question of whether they're bringing it home, whether they are actually converting invested capital into sales and profits. The other takeaway is the stability of the stock market. There are 11 sectors in the economy. Right now, technology is dominating the scene. But I think that the reason that the technology sector is so dominant is because of this shift toward intellectual property-based businesses. So, we used to talk about manufacturing companies as metal benders. And now we're looking at software-based businesses, data centers, cloud computing, Netflix, Spotify, all of it. And we compare, for example, the profitability of an Adobe with a company like Packaging Corp of America. They're simply night and day. Packaging Corp of America is an extraordinarily well-managed company, but the profitability that they can achieve from manufacturing a manufacturing plant compared to what Adobe can do with their software is just not comparable. So, a second takeaway is that in making decisions about where to invest, the increasingly importance of intellectual property-based assets is critical.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question. This actually ties us back to our panel. Both Juan Jose and Nicholas Carosi provided for us the background of their family businesses, and that one of their strategies was actually to minimize debt, and they tended to maintain very large sort of savings within the family rainy day funds. With the rise in inflation, should family business reconsider this idea?
Well, I think that there are good metrics of what is manageable debt and what is not. So a metric like debt to cash flow to be investment grade is about 3. Debt to cash flow of more than 3 starts to become challenged. A lot of middle market lending these days is between 5 and 6 times cash flow. And those metrics are manageable at today's interest rates. If they moved a lot higher, yeah, things would be a lot tougher. But I think that although the Federal Reserve is likely to move up short-term rates this year, what we have to ask ourselves is realistically, how much higher will interest rates go? There is a very big difference between the yield that institutional investors need, pension plans, retired investors, sovereign wealth funds, and the amount of interest and dividends being provided by companies that are borrowers of debt and operating businesses. And that supply and demand continues to put a lot of downward pressure on the level of interest rates. So calibrating a move in interest rates is very significant. And I don't think, this is my personal view, that rates will move up this year, but not a lot.
Okay. All right. The last question, we have 1 minute left in the queue, is where should small business, family business park money if we are doing a rainy day fund that we're saving, right? So you had talked about the debt side. Let's talk about the savings side. What are maybe some places that might be wise choices in the next year?
With interest rates so low, a lot of retired investors that traditionally would invest in things like municipal bonds have had a tough choice. If you could get 5 or 6% tax-free, and you were withdrawing 5% from your portfolio every year, that math worked. But if interest rates are at 1%, and you're trying to withdraw 5%, the income from your portfolio isn't going to true up that difference. And so a lot of investors have shifted from traditional bond portfolios into dividend-oriented stocks. And not necessarily Tesla-type companies, but more like predictable dividend-paying companies. The idea there is that dividends grow. Dividends, for example, on the S&P 500 have doubled in the last 10 years, meaning if 10 years ago you bought the S&P 500, the yield was 2%. If you were holding it 10 years later with the growth of dividends, that yield today is 4.5%. So the strategy is to find a way to get growing income. And that growing income can come from growing dividends. And so the idea is to look for companies that have the ability, the intent to actually raise their dividends over the next few years.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm going to, could you do me a favor and go down to the bottom of the screen and stop sharing for me so we can, should be the same green button. Or no, it's going to be at the top of the screen. There you go. Excellent. All right. Again, let's give John a round of applause. You can do that by hitting the little reaction button down in the menu. It would be a lot louder if we were all in the De La Rada Auditorium, and I hope sometime soon we can all be together in the De La Rada Auditorium so you can enjoy that together. I want to thank you, John, but all of you, our speakers. I know that Juan Jose had to duck out before the end here for another call. Nick, Aurora, and all of our family business partners for joining us today. So we're going to end on time. We officially wrap at 3. If you can stick around, what I'd like to do is I'll keep the Zoom open. And if you'd like to, we typically end these events with a networking reception where instead of just sitting alone in our offices, we have some wine. So you'll have to join us next time for that. But if you'd like to stick around and just catch up with your colleagues and friends, that would be great, but don't feel obligated to do so. And please remember to keep your eyes open for our next Family Business Consortium newsletter that we send out monthly. I'll be sending details hopefully soon on our next event, which should occur in early March and should hopefully be in person. And I'll remind you, if you haven't done so already, to formally register for the consortium. Some of you I know joined us back when in October when we were operating under a different system. We switched over to a new registration system. And so if you're uncertain whether you're registered, reach out to me via email. You should have all received an email from me this morning, and I'll make sure that we have you officially in the system. So thank you again, John. And thank you again, everyone. If you're going to stick around, just turn your video on for me so we can talk face to face. Otherwise, have a beautiful weekend, and my prayers go out to yours and your families. Thank you very much.